Have you ever wondered what kind of secret could make a man spend 40 years living beside the dead without ever leaving? What if I told you that somewhere, hidden behind rusted iron gates and forgotten graves, there was a cemetery where one grave must never be opened, no matter what? If you think ghosts are the scariest thing waiting in a cemetery, then stay with me until the end, because tonight's story might change your mind forever. It all began in the quiet town of Black Hollow, where an old cemetery rested on the edge of a dark forest. The cemetery was older than anyone could remember, filled with cracked tombstones, broken statues, and ancient trees whose branches blocked the moonlight. Every evening before sunset, the heavy gates were locked by the old caretaker named Samuel. He was a thin man with grey hair, deep tired eyes, and hands covered in dirt from years of digging graves. People respected him because he had worked there for nearly 40 years. But they also feared him because he never smiled and never answered questions about the cemetery after dark. Every child in town had heard the same warning from their parents. Never enter the cemetery after midnight, and never speak to Samuel if you see him carrying his old lantern in the darkness. Most people believed he was simply protecting the graves from vandals, but no one knew the real reason. One cold October evening, a young journalist named Ethan arrived in Black Hollow, hoping to write a story about haunted places. He laughed at ghost stories and believed every mystery had a logical explanation. When the locals warned him about Samuel and the cemetery, Ethan became even more curious. That night he hid behind a large stone angel until Samuel locked the gates and disappeared into a small wooden cabin near the back of the cemetery. As midnight arrived, the wind became strangely silent. Even the crickets stopped making noise. Ethan stepped carefully between the graves with only a flashlight in his hand. Suddenly, he heard something that made his heart race. It sounded like soft footsteps beneath the ground. He froze. The sound moved from one grave to another, as if someone was walking under the earth. Ethan convinced himself it was only his imagination and continued deeper into the cemetery until he found a large black headstone with no name, only one sentence carved into the stone: "Do not wake what sleeps below." Before he could take a picture, his flashlight flickered and went out. In the darkness, he saw Samuel standing only a few feet away, holding his old lantern. The old caretaker looked terrified instead of angry. "You shouldn't be here," Samuel whispered. "Leave now." Ethan refused. He demanded to know what was buried beneath the nameless grave. Samuel stayed silent for a long moment before saying, "It isn't what is buried here that matters. It's what is trying to get out." At that exact moment, the ground beneath the grave shook. A deep cracking sound echoed through the cemetery. Small stones rolled across the dirt as a long crack appeared around the black headstone. Ethan stumbled backward in fear. Then came the sound, slow scratching from beneath the earth, followed by a low whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It repeated the same words over and over. "Open the gate." Samuel quickly placed his lantern on the grave and began reading from a small, worn notebook he always carried. The whisper grew louder. The trees shook, although there was no wind. Every crow in the cemetery suddenly flew into the sky screaming. Ethan watched in horror as pale grey hands pushed through the cracked soil around the nameless grave. They were not human. Their fingers were too long, with black nails that looked like broken claws. Samuel continued reading while tears rolled down his face. He told Ethan that many years ago, before he became the caretaker, a strange traveler arrived in Black Hollow asking for shelter. The traveler was never seen during the day and only walked at night. Soon people began disappearing. Those who survived claimed they heard whispers calling their names from empty graves. The town finally captured the traveler after discovering he wasn't human at all. According to an old priest, the creature fed on fear and could enter any person's mind if they listened to its voice long enough. They could not kill it, so they trapped it beneath the cemetery using ancient symbols and buried it under the nameless grave. Since then, every midnight the creature tried to escape by whispering to anyone nearby. Many caretakers had gone mad after hearing its voice. Samuel was the only one strong enough to guard the grave year after year. He stayed because if he ever left, no one would keep the creature imprisoned. As Samuel finished reading, the whispers changed. This time they spoke directly to Ethan. They copied his mother's voice, then his father's voice, then his own voice. "Help me," they begged. "I'm trapped." Ethan knew they were lies, but hearing familiar voices filled him with fear. Suddenly he reached toward the headstone without thinking. Samuel shouted, "Don't touch it!" But it was too late. Ethan's hand brushed the stone and the ancient seal cracked completely. The ground exploded open with a deafening roar. Thick black smoke poured from the hole, twisting into the shape of a tall shadow with glowing white eyes. It had no face, only endless darkness. The creature smiled without a mouth. Every grave in the cemetery began shaking as ghostly figures rose silently from the ground. Samuel stepped in front of Ethan and held up his lantern. The bright flame burned with an unnatural blue light. "Run!" he screamed. Ethan finally listened. He sprinted toward the cemetery gate while the whispers chased him through the darkness. Behind him, he heard Samuel shouting ancient words, followed by a blinding flash that lit the entire cemetery brighter than daylight. Ethan crashed through the gate and fell onto the road outside. When he looked back, the cemetery was completely silent again. The lantern's light had disappeared. The next morning, the townspeople found the gates unlocked for the first time in 40 years. Samuel was gone. Only his old notebook rested on the nameless grave. The crack in the headstone had vanished, as if nothing had happened. Inside the notebook, Ethan found one final message written in Samuel's shaky handwriting. "Every prison needs a new guard." Ethan never published his story. Instead, he accepted the keys to the cemetery and moved into the old wooden cabin. The townspeople noticed that every evening before sunset, a lantern once again walked silently among the graves. Years later, children still whispered about the lonely caretaker who never smiled and never left the cemetery after dark. Some say that if you stand outside the cemetery gates at exactly midnight, you can hear two voices instead of one. One belongs to the creature beneath the ground. The other belongs to Samuel, still guarding the prison he promised to protect forever. And if you ever hear someone gently whisper your name from behind a gravestone, never answer, because the thing beneath the cemetery is always searching for the next person willing to open the gate. If you enjoyed this chilling story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another terrifying tale. Sleep carefully, and I'll see you in the next story.